We continue now at the top of Daf Memvav Amud Beis in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 46b. And the previous Amud Rav said that the tenufa, the waving of the carbon, is ma'akev by Nazir, meaning if the carbon is not waved, so the Nazir does not become permitted to have wine or to become tamei meis. And the Gemara says, Umi ma'akev, is the waving really ma'akev? V'atanya, but we learned in a Tosefta, Zos Toras HaNazir, Ben sheyesh lo kapayim, Ben she'ein lo kapayim. The Pasuk says, Zos Toras HaNazir, this is the law of the Nazir, and we understand from that Pasuk that the halacha applies whether he has palms, whether he doesn't have palms, and the Gemara understands this to mean, Ben she'ein lo kapayim, if he doesn't have palms, meaning he can't do the waving is not ma'akev. The Tosefta says the exact opposite. And the Gemara continues, but what about that which we learned in the following brisa? Zos Toras HaNazir, ben sheyesh lo sar, ben she'ein lo sar. The brisa says similarly, it says Zos Toras HaNazir, and the halacha applies whether he has hair or whether he does not have hair. So what does that statement mean? Hachanami de lo ma'akva doesn't mean to say that if he has no hair, it's not ma'akev. That's how they're understanding the Tosefta. In other words, your understanding of the Tosefta is that bein she'ein lo kapayim means that the waving is not ma'akev. Is the understanding of the brisa that says bein she'ein lo sar, is it the same understanding that it's not ma'akev? That cannot be the case. V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa, Nazir memorat, let's say you have a Nazir that's bald, Beis Shammai omrim einot tzarech lahavir tar al rosho. Beis Shammai say he doesn't need to take the razor and place it over his head. Ubeis Hillel omrim, and Beis Hillel say no, it's tzarech lahavir tar al rosho. He needs to use a razor despite the fact that he's bald. Now, what exactly does that mean? V'yomer Ravina, and Ravina said on that, Mai einot tzarech lebeis Shammai. What does it mean according to Beis Shammai that he doesn't need to use the razor because he's bald? It means einot tzarech ein lo takana. What it actually means is he doesn't need to, meaning there's no solution over here. He has no hair, he can't shave, and therefore, since he has no hair and he can't shave, there's no solution for him in terms of the halacha of the requirement of shaving. So according to Beis Shammai, what Beis Shammai is really saying is einot tzarech means that the shaving is ma'akev. Hala Beis Hillel, yesh lo takana, and according to Beis Hillel, who says tzarech lahavir, sounds like even though he doesn't have hair, but he still needs to use a razor. That's what it means, yesh lo takana. There is a solution according to Beis Hillel. V'hainu de Rabbi Pedas, and the Gemara says if you understand the brisa in that fashion, it follows what Rabbi Pedas said. The Amar Rabbi Pedas, because Rabbi Pedas said Beis Shammai for Rabbi Eliezer, Amru davar echad. The Beis Shammai and Rabbi Eliezer, they say the same thing. Meaning Beis Shammai that says einot tzarech, it really means that it's a requirement, that it's ma'akev. That's the same as Rabbi Eliezer in the following brisa. My Rabbi Eliezer, what Rabbi Eliezer are we talking about? The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, and they changed this to the Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah. This is talking about Mitzora. Ein lo bohen yad v'regel. Let's say the Mitzora doesn't have a thumb and he doesn't have a big toe, so ein lo taharo olamis. So that's part of the purification process, involves the using of the Mitzora's thumb, of the using of the Mitzora's thumb, of the using of the Mitzora's big toe. So therefore, in such a situation, he cannot be purified at all. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, that's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Rabbi Shimon says, Yanichenu al makom v'yetzi, just place what needs to be placed, the blood, place it on that area of the thumb, that area of the toe, and that's enough, and then it's fine. The Chachamim say, Yaniach al shel small, you don't have it on the right hand, so use it on the left hand. V'yetzi, and then he can go out, and that will be effective. And so the point of Rabbi Pedas is that Beis Shammai, who say in the situation where the person is bald, einot tzarech, what he's really saying is it is ma'akev, and that's the same as Rabbi Eliezer in a situation where the Mitzora does not have a bow and yad v'regel, so then also it's going to be ma'akev and ein lo tahara olamis. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Eliezer, the Tanya, ein lo Mitzora bo and yad uvo and regel, ein lo tahara olamis. Again, Rabbi Eliezer says, if the Mitzora has no thumb and no big toe, so then he can never be purified. Lefisha ein yochel lekayim bo matan dom v'shemen al bo and yadu. As we said, the reason is because you can't place the blood and the oil on his thumb because he doesn't have a thumb. Shema mina, and the point over here is we see from this, to me, the Kamar Rabbi Pedas, to Beis Shammai of Rabbi Eliezer, Amr davar echad. From the fact that Rabbi Pedas says that Beis Shammai and Rabbi Eliezer are the same shita. V'shamina lu leBeis Shammai da'amri, the teglach haser ma'akva, and Beis Shammai is the one saying that the shaving of the hair is ma'akev. If he's bald, it's going to be ma'akev. The Rabbi Eliezer nami koi kavasayon. Rabbi Eliezer follows Beis Shammai shita. The islu the tenufa ma'akva, that hold that the tenufa, the waving, is going to be ma'akev. V'heich mas nisa the tani ben shein lo kapayim al karchach the ma'akva mashman. The point of all of this is to say that Tosefta that we brought at the beginning that says ben shein lo kapayim, it really means to say that it is ma'akev. The fact that he doesn't have palms is going to be ma'akev, and therefore the Tosefta really is in line with the shita of Rav. And the Gemara continues, Lishna Achrina Amrila, another version of the above discussion. Amar Rav says, The Bach changes it to Amar Rava. Rava says, Tenufa ben Nazir ma'akeves, the waving of the carbon by the Nazir. Again, it is ma'akev. The Nazir only becomes permitted after the waving of the carbon. And the Gemara says again, Aliba Daman, who are we following over here? Ilema Aliba de Rabbi Eliezer. If we're following Rabbi Eliezer Pshita, that's obvious. Ha'amar Rabbi Eliezer, Achar Ma'asem Kulam, like we said before. Rabbi Eliezer says it's after all of the activities that the Nazir becomes permitted. So of course, the Tenufa is included. The Tenufa is ma'akev. Ela Aliba de Rabbanan. Rather, we're talking according to the opinion of the Rabbanan. But the Gemara says, would that even be true according to the Rabbanan? Hashta yeshalomar teglachas amri Rabbanan lo ma'akva. If the Rabbanan say that the shaving is not ma'akev, tenufa miboy, do we even need to say so by the waving? Of course the waving is not going to be ma'akev according to the Rabbanan. But the Gemara continues, umi lo ma'akva, but is the waving really not ma'akev? V'atanya, but we learned in the Tosefta, Zos Toras HaNazir ben sheyesh lo kapayim uven she'ein lo kapayim, that the words in the pasuk of Zos Toras HaNazir teach us whether he has palms, whether he does not have palms. And the Gemara's understanding at this point in time is that means to say that it is ma'akev. Ben she'ein lo kapayim means that if he doesn't have palms, so then there is no remedy, and therefore it's ma'akev, it's going to be problematic. But the Gemara says, 1 second, but what about that which we learned in a Braisa? Zos Toras HaNazir ben sheyesh lo seir or ben she'ein lo seir. It says this is the law of the Nazir, whether he has hair or whether he doesn't have hair. Are you interpreting it in that fashion? Hachinami de ma'akva. Does it mean to say that the hair is ma'akev? Is that how you're understanding that the hair is ma'akev and the kapayim are ma'akev? But that's not the understanding by hair. Vatanya, but we learned in a Braisa, Nazir memorot, when it comes to a Nazir who's bald, Beis Shammai omrim einot tzarech lahavir tar al rosho. Beis Shammai say he doesn't need to pass a razor over his head. Ubeis Hillel omrim tzarech, and Beis Hillel say that he does need to pass a razor over his head, and therefore it sounds like Beis Hillel is saying that it's not ma'akev. He needs to do so, and that's what he does, but it's not going to be ma'akev. So Amar Rabbi Avina says, no, my tzarech leBeis Hillel. What does tzarech mean according to Beis Hillel, that he needs to pass the razor over his head? What it means actually is Beis Hillel is strict. Tzarech ve'ein lo takana. It means to say that he needs to, but he's not able to. There's no hair, and therefore there is no solution. And therefore Beis Hillel, on the contrary, they are saying, Beis Hillel is saying that it is ma'akev by the seir, and that's what it means, ben sheyesh lo seir, ben she'ein lo seir. It could mean that it is ma'akev, according to Beis Hillel. And it could be also by ben sheyesh lo kapayim, ben she'ein lo kapayim. It means that it is ma'akev. The idea again is leBeis Shammai yesh lo takana. According to this understanding, then Beis Shammai is saying eino tzarech means to say there is a solution over here. It's not ma'akev, and if you follow that to pliga de Rabbi Pedas, this approach, of course, would argue on Rabbi Pedas, because Rabbi Pedas said that Beis Shammai and Rabbi Eliezer, they were both saying the same thing. They were both saying that it is ma'akev. The fact that he's missing the hair, the fact that he's missing the thumb, is going to be problematic, and they're aligned. And over here in this version, we're saying no. Beis Shammai is saying yesh lo takana. There is a solution. Beis Shammai is not the same as Rabbi Eliezer, and it's actually Beis Hillel who say tzarech ve'ein lo takana, that it's required and there is no solution. And Rashi explains the second version of the Gemara, Lashon Acher Amri Lo Amar Rav or Amar Rava Tenufa Ma'akeves ben Nazir. Again, Rava says that the waving is ma'akev, and according to this version, Umi Lo Ma'akva Va'afilu Rabbanan. The Gemara is asking in the other direction: is it really not ma'akev even according to the Rabbanan? Of course, it's ma'akev. Va'atanya, but we learned in the Tosefta, Zos Toras HaNazir Ben She'ein Lo Kapayim Mashma de Tzarech Tenufa. The Gemara understands that Ben She'ein Lo Kapayim sounds like the waving is required. The Tenufa Ma'akva. The Gemara is asking that the waving should be required according to everybody, even according to the Rabbanan. And then the Gemara asks back in the opposite direction, Umi Ma'akva, but is it really ma'akev? But what about that which we learned in the Braisa by the case of the hair? Zos Toras HaNazir Ben She'ein Lo Seir. It says this is the law of the Nazir Ben She'ein Lo Seir, and that does not mean to say it is ma'akev. That means to say the opposite. It means to say it's not ma'akev. Vatanya, as we learned in a Braisa, Nazir Memorat Beis Hillel Omrim Tzarech Lahavir Tar Al Roshu. It says that by a bald Nazir, Beis Hillel say that he has to pass the razor over his head. Demashma Diyaver Al Roshu V'Yetze sounds like Beis Hillel saying he just passes it over the head, and that's going to fulfill the obligation. The lo ma'akva, meaning it's not ma'akev. The yesh lo takana, that there is a simple solution. Al mohanami detani ben she'ein lo kapayim hachinami de lo ma'akva. The same thing is true in the Tosefta you quoted. When it says ben she'ein lo kapayim, it means to say it is not ma'akev. The Gemara argues v'kasha Rava, and that's difficult according against Rava, because Rava is the one that said that tenufa is ma'akev, and now we're saying that the Tosefta says that it is not ma'akev. And the Gemara then says Amar Ravina says liola me'molach de ma'akva karava. It could very well be the Tosefta Tosefta is saying that the Tnufa is Ma'akev, like Rava, and my Tzarech leBeis Hillel, and what does Tzarech mean according to Beis Hillel? That's also the same thing. Tzarech ve'ein lo takana de Ma'akva means to say it's required, meaning the shaving is required, and you're not able to shave in this case, and it is Ma'akev, so Beis Hillel would be saying that the shaving is Ma'akev, and the situation of a bald Nazir would be problematic, and the same thing would be true if ein lo kapayim, that would be problematic, because the waving is Ma'akev, and the Gemara says according to this version, Halabeis Shammai yesh lo takana. It's according to Beis Hillel that it's Ma'akev, and it's according to Beis Shammai that it is not Ma'akev. It's according to Beis Shammai that there is a solution, and the Gemara says Upliga de Rabbi Pedas. That would argue with Rabbi Pedas. The Amar de Beis Shammai v'Rabbi Eliezer Amar davar echad v'chulu. Again, Rabbi Pedas said Beis Shammai and Rabbi Eliezer, they were the same shita. They said that it is Ma'akev. According to this version of the Gemara, Beis Shammai is the one that says it's not Ma'akev, and Beis Shammai would not be like Rabbi Eliezer. And we will note over here a couple of points and distinctions between the first version in the Gemara and the second version in the Gemara. In the first version of the Gemara had asked Umi Ma'akva. The Gemara asked from the Tosefta and the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer, because again, the Gemara is making a distinction between the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer and the Shita of the Chachamim. According to Rabbi Eliezer, the Tanufa is Ma'akev, and according to the Chachamim, the Tanufa is not Ma'akev. And so the Gemara was asking from the Tosefta, which says Ben Sheyesh lo Kapayim, Ben She'en lo Kapayim. That seems to be saying it's not Ma'akev. That's the Gemara's initial understanding in the first version, and therefore that was a question according to the Shita within Rabbi Eliezer. And according to the first version, the conclusion is no, the Tosefta actually means it is Ma'akev, and the Tosefta is following Beis Shammai and Rabbi Eliezer, the same Shita, the idea being again that Tanufa is Ma'akev. And in the second version of the Gemara is asking from the same Tosefta, but the Gemara is asking on the sheet of the Chachamim. The Gemara is saying, Umi lo ma'akva, isn't it ma'akev even according to the Chachamim? And the Gemara's understanding in this case is, Ben sheyesh lo kapayim, uven she'en lo kapayim, that Tosefta that says, Ben sheyesh lo kapayim, Ben she'en lo kapayim, is going according to the Chachamim, and is saying that it is ma'akev. And then the Gemara questioned that. The Gemara said, no, maybe it means it's not ma'akev, and the Gemara ultimately concludes, no, the Tosefta does mean it is ma'akev, and in the second version, the Tosefta is following the Shita of Beis Hillel, and the Tosefta is saying within the Shita of Beis Hillel, the Tanufa, the waving, is in fact Ma'akev. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Gilach al hazevach v'nimtza pasel. Let's say the Nazir shaves over a certain carbon, meaning he brings one of the carbonos and then he shaves, and it turns out that the carbon that he brought is pasel. So tiglach psula, so his shaving is pasel, that's disqualified. Uzvachav lo alulo, and also the carbonos, they do not count for him. Gilach ala chatas shelo lishma. Let's say he shaves on the carbon chatas, but he brings the chatas shelo lishma, not with the proper intention. V'achar kach hevi carbonos of lishman, and then after that he brings the other carbonos lishman. Tiglachto psula, again the shaving is disqualified. Uzvachav lo alulo, and the other carbonos, they do not count. Gilach ala ola or ala shlamim shelo lishman. Let's say he shaves on the carbon ola or on the carbon shlamim, and again those are not brought with the right intention. V'achar kach hevi carbonos of lishman, and after that he brings his carbonos for the proper for their sake with the proper intention. Tiglachto psula. So again his shaving is going to be disqualified. Uzvachav lo alulo, and the carbonos will not count. Rabbi Shimon says that in this last case, Gilach ala ola or ala shlamim shelo lishman, so also hazevach lo alalo, so that particular carbon that was not with the right intention, that won't count. Aval shar zvachim ala, but the other carbonos will count. V'im gilach al shlashta, now let's say he shaves after bringing all three carbonos. V'nimtza echon mehan kosher, and it turns out that one of the three is kosher. Tiglachto ksheira, so the shaving is kosher. V'yavi shar zvachim, and he should bring the other carbonos again, because those carbonos were not good. And Rashi explains, Gilach al echad mizvachav, again, let's say he shaves on one of the three carbonos, v'nimtza pasel, it turns out to be pasel, teglachto psula, so the shaving is pasel, v'soser shloshim, it undoes, he has to extend 30 days, uzvachav shehifresh achshav lo alu v'tzarach lavi acherim b'mekoman, and the carbonos that he separated are not good, he has to bring new ones. Keitzad, how so? Gilach al chatas shelo lishma, kolomar shanasa shelo l'shem chatas. What it means shelo lishma is he's bringing that carbon, but not l'shem chatas. V'achar gachevi shar carbonosav, afterwards he brings his other carbonos, Kagona olo shlamim lishman, he brings the ola shlamim for the right reasons. V'cheinem gilach ala olo ala shlamim shenasu shelo lishman. Let's say he shaves on the ola shlamim and they're not brought lishma. V'kulon teglachton psul, in all these cases the shaving is puzzle. V'soser shloshim, it extends 30 days. Umevi karbanas acherim b'makom shlashton, and he has to bring other carbonos in place of these three carbonos. But Rabbi Shimon makes a distinction. Rabbi Shimon omer gilach ala ola ala shlamim shelo lishman. If he shaves on the ola or shlamim, those those are done not lishma. Ushar karbanos hevi lishman, but the other ones he brought lishma. So tiglachto ksheira. So in that case, his shaving is going to be kosher. Ushar zvachim alulo, and the other karbanos are going to be effective. Avaloso azavach bilvad lo alulo. It's just that carbon that he brought shelo lishma that won't count. V'yavi zavach acher b'mkomo. He has to bring another carbon in its place. And the reason why the shaving is kosher, the reason is because other karbanos in general, they are kosher. It's a Mishnah in Zvachim that if you bring a carbon shalol lishman, it's still kosher. It just doesn't fulfill whatever obligation. Let's say the bailim had an obligation to fulfill, it won't fulfill that obligation. So too over here, it's going to be kosher in terms of the shaving. But if he shaved on the carbon chatas shalol lishma, moder Rabbi Shimon de teglachto psula, then Rabbi Shimon would agree that the shaving is pasul, lefisha zivcho pasul, because there the entire carbon is disqualified. All karbanos are kosher shalol lishma except for chatas sheshachta shalol lishma. If the chatas is shechta shalol lishma psula, then it's going to be pasul. V'im gilach al shloshtan stam. Now let's say again he shaved on all three karbanos. V'nimtza echad me'an kosher. If it's found that even one of them is kosher, teglachto ksheira l'divrei hakol. Everybody would agree that the shaving is kosher. Sharei al zevach kosher namigilach, because he shaved on a kosher carbon. V'yavi shar zvachim b'makom apsul, and then he'll just bring other karbanos to make up for the disqualified karbanos. And the Gemara says, Amar Ravada Barava says, Zoso Meris, this Mishnah shows, Kasav Rabbi Shimon, that Rabbi Shimon holds, Nazir Shagilach al Shalmin and Dava Yatza, that if a Nazir shaves on a Shlomim that's a donation, not a Shlomim that's brought for his obligation of Nazirus, he is Yotze, he fulfills his obligation of shaving. That's exactly what Rabbi Shimon is saying in the Mishnah, because Rabbi Shimon is saying if he brings the Shlomim Shalol Lishma, the shaving is still going to be effective, because a Shlomim Shalol Lishma is the same thing, it's the equivalent of a Shalmin and Dava. My time, and what's the reason? Damar Krok, because the pasuk says v'nasan alo eish asher tacha zevach hashlamim. It says he puts it on the fire under the shlamim. V'lo kasav al shlamav. It doesn't say on his shlamim, meaning we're not necessarily talking about a carbon shlamim that fulfills his obligation in terms of nazirus. Even if it has the status of shalmei nedava, that would be effective enough for the shaving to also be effective. We will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph.